this is just a quick legal disclaimer. I'm not advocating to purchase any product or to use anything without reading the appropriate safety instructions and things like that. And then any imagery that is in this presentation is from Collective Commons or from Cornell Cooperative Extension footage or from a page cited resource. So a little bit about myself and my small farm venture. So I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. Me and my family grew up in the country, but my parents weren't farmers. And ever since I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a farmer. My parents always said, make sure you have a job first, and then later on, then you can start farming. So I took their advice and went to college. I went to the University of Wisconsin, and I was focused on law school. But once I finished my bachelor's degree, I decided I didn't want to go to college anymore. So instead, I enlisted in the U.S. Army. And after basic, I was stationed here in upstate New York at Fort Drum. After my first deployment, I met my wife and we bought a small house in a village in northern Jefferson County here in New York. During my second deployment is when I really started thinking about my small farm aspirations I had when I was a kid. I started doing my research, started putting all my money to be able to pay off my first house, and I found a perfect fit. Found about 130 acres with a house that was built in the 1840s, probably remodeled in the 1960s, with a barn that you could probably drop up through the roof with a hole that had a hole so big in it. So once I got back, I finally had the opportunity to purchase that piece of land. And since 2015, my wife and I have remodeled the entire home, fixed the barn, put in fencing, and now raise Highland cattle, sheep, and poultry. And you have a picture of me there with my buddy Finn, our Scottish Highland bull. So let's get started. Financing options. You should have a financial plan that doesn't initially rely on farm income. We have a lot of folks that come in, including myself, when they first get started, they're thinking that as soon as they start farming that the money's going to start rolling in. But unfortunately, that's not the case. It takes time. So you need to make a plan where you're not relying on your farm to be making money for quite a while. There are grants, but generally for farms with established gross income of over 2 years. These grants are generally highly specialized and specific, and they require an extensive business plan. For more information on that, you can always reach out to your local extension office, and they'll be able to guide you on what those grants are and what it takes to get into them. Other financing options is you can always finance your land or property through a bank or credit union like you would with any other home. But with a lot of banks and credit unions, depending on how big the land parcel is or what is on that land as far as buildings go, a lot of times banks won't fund that and you have to go through a farm credit union. The farm credit union that we have here in Jefferson County is Farm Credit East, and they have a lot of great new farmer programs that you can look into, and I provided the link for that. Another financial option is through Veterans Affairs. They can help veterans and service members and their survivors to buy, build, improve, or refinance a home. But with what I found with that, they're also very particular on what they will fund. And a lot of times, if you're looking at getting a fixer-upper, they may not fund that, but it's something to look into, and I provided the link for that. Another financing option is what's called a land contract. Now, what a land contract is where the land owner is financing the land themselves, and you're paying them more or less as you would a bank. These are generally contracted through a real estate lawyer, and I would highly recommend that if you are going to be doing something like a land contract, that you contact a lawyer and talk to them about it and see what you need to do. Land use. You got to ask yourself, what are you going to farm? Are you going to farm crops? Are you going to farm critters? Or are you going to farm both? This helps you determine parcel size and preferred land composition. Now on a lot of real estate forms as far as your abstract and tax records divide land into tillable, pasture, and wasteland. Tillable land is land that you can use to farm crops, whereas pasture land is where might not necessarily be able to plow it and make row crops, but you could definitely feed animals on it. And it's called wasteland, which is a term I don't really like, but it's what they use. Is land where you can't necessarily build on it. It's not really best suited for pasture, but a lot of times that wasteland is going to have woodland products on it. It's going to have rock features on it, and it will have its use in its own way. Or it also might be wetlands. Then you need to ask yourself, what do you want to farm versus what does your local market need? You want to look around and see what other people are doing and what type of things aren't available that would also sell in your area. What resources does your land already have in place? Whether it be a waterway, trees, perennial crops such as asparagus, ramps, or rhubarb, what is already in place that you can use? And then what would you need to change or add to accomplish your goals? So for example, if you wanted to tap trees for maple syrup, but your land doesn't have any maple trees, how long is that going to take to plant a reliable crop of maples to be able to harvest maple syrup? Or if you wanted to do row crops, but your only tillable land is overgrown, how expensive is it going to be to clear all that land out and plow it out? These are all things that you just need to take in mind. How are you going to farm? You just want to have enough for family use and self-sustain? Do you want to do U-pick? Do you want to do agritourism, where you're having people come and tour your operation? Or do you want to go commercial? And then from commercial, are you going to be selling to a vendor or direct to a market through like a farmer's market or direct to consumer? Marketing. Have a business plan. So there's a lot of different resources that are available to help you come up with a business plan. It can be really intimidating at first if you don't know where to start. So in the Jefferson County area, there's the Small Business Development Center, and I provide the link for that. You can also contact your local extension office, and they'll be able to help you come up with the business plan for what you want to do. Who are you going to sell to? Direct to consumer, to an auction house, to retail, and that'll help develop your business plan. Also in your business plan, you're gonna have to figure out how do you find someone to buy your product and how to advertise. What can you sell and what are the restrictions? So New York State being New York State, there's rules for everything, right? Agriculture is no different, and there's different steps in place to be able to sell certain products. But these links below from the Department of Agriculture in New York, it'll find out what you need to do to be able to sell a certain product, whether that be at a farmer's market or to retail or direct to consumer. I'm going to give you guys an example. This is what I call the chicken example. So for birds that you raise on farm and that you process, you can do up to 1,000 birds, whether that be chickens or ducks or what have you, or 250 turkeys, one or the other. You can sell these direct to consumer, but not to a farmer's market. Anything over 1,000 birds, these need to be taken to what's called a 5A butcher facility. If you take these birds there, you can then sell them at a farmer's market or retail. And any facility that does over 20,000 birds has to be through a USDA butcher facility. Where are you going to sell? Where's the location and what are the seasons for your local farmer's market? Generally, your local extension office will have a list of where your local farmer's markets are. I provided the one here for Jefferson County. Where are your local auction houses, whether that be for livestock or produce? What are your local markets or for individual sale? Like we were saying before, what products in your area are in demand? What is your area lacking? What processing facilities do you have as far as USDA slaughterhouse, custom butcher shop, 5A or 20C kitchen? Now, what is the cost going to be to pay for that processing, to rent the facility and just do the work yourself, or to even build yourself your own processing facility? How are you going to transport goods from farm to market? Are you going to truck them yourself? Are you going to pay someone else to truck them? What is the availability of the local trucking companies? Are they going to be able to ship for you when you need your product shipped? And how much is that going to cost and take away from your overhead? Location. All right, road location and type. The different types of roads that we have in New York State, at least, are interstate, state, county, town, village, and city. In New York, the way we have things organized is our state is divided up into counties, and from there, the counties are divided up into townships. Within the townships themselves, there'll be villages or cities. And how big these roads are determined who takes care of the roads. So your state roads like US 11, State Route 3, State Route 12, those are all taken care of by State Department of Transportation. So they have a lot of funding. They have a lot of drivers on the road taking care of those roads. Your county roads, those are taken care of by the county or the township, which might not have as many vehicles or as much funding. And of course, your village is going to be taken care of by village and city Department of Transportations. Restrictions on what you can use on the road. So a lot of these different roads that you might be on are going to have restrictions on what type of vehicles you can take on that road, what type of classifications that can go on that road, and how much weight. And it might not necessarily affect you unless you're living on a road that has a bridge on it that's rated for 10,000 pounds, but you're trying to move 80,000 pounds of hay over it a few times a year. So it's just something to keep in mind. So with these roads, you're going to have a balance of maintenance versus traffic amount. Generally, the bigger the road, the better it's going to be maintained in the wintertime and throughout the summertime. But that also means more traffic. But with more traffic, that also means that these could be potential customers, especially if you're trying to sell on farm. Equipment and potential customer access. When you're looking at your property that you're interested in, you want to take into account what type of equipment are you going to have moving in and out of your farm. All right, are you going to be having big trucks moving livestock? Are you going to be having larger harvesting equipment? And also ease of access for your potential customers. Is it easy to get in and out of? Is it easy to find? Stuff like that. Zoning and restrictions. So zoning, your property can be zoned as agricultural, residential, or commercial. A good way to figure that out is to find your county real estate map. I brought the link here for the Jefferson County map. And the neat thing about this is, so you can look up through whatever property you're interested in and find what the tax ID is. Once you find the tax ID, you're able to find out a whole bunch of different stuff as far as how much taxes are there, how much is rated for tillable land versus wasteland versus pasture. So it's just a handy resource to have. Local ordinances for town, village, county, and state restrictions. So different regions have different rules on what you can and can't do on your property depending on the zoning. And also might have restrictions on what you can build and where you can build it. So example, if you're living next to a larger state road, there's a certain amount of distance that you need to build away from the roadway and what you can build. So to be able to figure this stuff out, depending on where you're living, a good place to start is always the town office. Let them know what you're thinking about doing and asking them what you can and can't do, and they should be able to help you out. What you can raise and how many. Some townships might have restrictions on what you can raise depending on how big your lot is, and some places will not let you raise certain things at all, such as hogs or having a butchering facility. These also can be found through the town or village office. An example might be if you live in a village, you might have an acre lot, but and have room for plenty of ducks and chickens and hogs and whatnot, but they only will allow you to have up to 6 birds, and none of them can be roosters. So again, if you have any questions on that, contact your town or village office. Neighbors. What other types of farm and farm businesses are in your area? Are they going to be competition or potential resources? How is their agricultural venues going to affect you? What can you tell about you? What can they tell you about your property? So depends on what you're planning on doing when you're making that big switch to moving out in the country. Are you going to be bothered by other people spreading manure on their fields, or are you planning on doing something through your agricultural venture that's going to make your neighbors upset? If you're living next to a large subdivision and you're planning on having a hog farm, how is that going to affect you? So in New York, there is a right to farm law, and I just provided a link for that so you guys can read through it on yourself. Different counties have different rules, but if you have any questions on it, it's a great resource to read through and just double check. Distance from civilization. So living out in the country, you're going to be farther away from work, stores, restaurants, places of worship, and so on. And how is that going to affect your lifestyle? Is it part of your lifestyle now that you're able to order out and have food delivered to your house whenever you want? Is that going to be a big deal that it's going to take you a half hour to get to work or to get to a restaurant? What are the additional travel costs and time to get to work? A good example is this: I live about half an hour from work, which is about 35 miles from home to work. My sister lives in Chicago, and she lives 2 miles from work and constantly gives me a hard time that I don't know how you could live so far away from work. It must take you forever. And when I ask her, well, how long does it take you to get to work? And she tells me about a half hour because of traffic. It's a give and take. So it's not as bad as you think, but it's just something that you want to think about. For those of you with kids, what school districts and available busing is available with the property you're looking at? Is the busing going to be able to be on route where they can pick you up at your home? Or is there a local drop-off point, or you have to take them to school every day? What is the difference from hospitals, dental, primary care, specialty care practice that accepts your insurance? So as sure a lot of you guys know, you have insurance. Not every place is going to accept your type of insurance without you paying out of pocket. Or if for what your personal and family needs are, if you have someone that needs to have specialty care, perhaps dialysis or something like that, how long is it going to take them for you to get to a hospital to get that treatment? So it's just something you're going to need to think about. Also, distance from emergency services, fire, ambulance, law enforcement. Generally, in rural America, the response time is twice as much as in time as it would be in a city for all emergency services. In Jefferson County, there are places where it can take up to an hour for emergency services to get to your location. So these are just things that you need to keep in mind when making your preparations and picking out property. Other considerations, which can be both pros and cons, where the location of public lands and trails, what are the local events in the area, and how is that going to affect your business, whether positively or negatively? Military training areas, how close is the property to that? I can tell you from experience, being next to Fort Drum, a lot of times you'll hear the ranges and have your windows rattle from ordnance going off, and you get used to it, but not everyone loves it. So just something to keep in mind. Also, what is how close are you to airports? Weather. Growing limitations. So this is a plant hardiness zone map. This is based off of the average annual minimum winter temperature, and it determines the suitability of what type of crops you can grow. So different regions will have different zone numbers. You can have numerous zones in a county or even a township. And a good example of that is the sweet cherry tree. So in Jefferson County, in the northeastern part of the county is a zone 4A, so sweet cherries won't grow there. But if you go over to the western side of the county, over here, you're a zone 5A, and sweet cherries grow just fine there. So another thing you need to keep in mind is just because you see something for sale or see something growing in a general region doesn't necessarily mean that where you want to grow it is going to grow, right? Even if you see items for sale at a farm stand, it's also a common practice to bring produce in from a different area to lengthen their sale time. So just something to keep in mind. And over here at the bottom, this is a link through USDA where you can type in your zip code and find out what your growing zone is and find out what you can grow. Rainfall. So what are your growing season weather patterns? This link here, Weather Underground, is a really neat site, something that I play with a lot, and it'll be able to tell you the type of the seasonal weather, how much rainfall you generally get during a rainy or a growing season, prevailing winds, average temperatures. So it's something really neat to look into. Seasonal wetlands. If you're looking at property, you might be looking at a nice, beautiful, dry field in August, but in May, after the snow melt and the rains, that same field might be under 2 foot of water. So you need to look out and think, where does that water come? Where's water coming from? Where does it drain? And just something to keep out for, and ask who you're buying from, and maybe even some of the local neighbors, hey, is there any wetland areas, or where does our water drainage go? Flood potential. So this is a site from FEMA, or it's a handy map where you can look through and it'll have different distinctions of where flood zones are. This is also important not only because you don't want to be building somewhere where it might flood, but also in those flood areas, there's additional insurances that you have to get, and it might be a greater expense to you. So something to take a look at when you're purchasing property, especially near a waterway. Winter. So seasonal trends, lake effect and snow belt. For some of you that may not be from the North Country but are planning on coming up here, you'll hear these terms thrown around a lot. Basically what that means is there's areas that are more likely to get snow throughout a winter season. Good example of this in Jefferson County, in the north end of the county, we generally get less snow than those in the southern area of the county just because of that lake effect snow belt. Snow removal, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, those bigger roads are going to be maintained better than your smaller roads. You also need to take notice, and if the property you're looking at is what's called a seasonal access road. And what these are generally dirt roads, and what they mean is they are not maintained, they're not plowed in wintertime. Your driveway, who's going to take care of the snowfall in your own driveway? Are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to pay someone else to do it? And where are you going to store all that extra snow? Preparations, things you need to get ready for winter. You got to get your heating fuel ready. You should probably have provisions stacked up in case you get snowed in for a few days or power goes out. A generator, what won't work when the power goes out? Livestock, feed, and water access. Do your animals that you plan on having, are they going to have access to feed? Are they going to have water access? There's some things you'll need to get sorted out before winter time. Feed testing and adequate nutrition. These are stuff that your local extension office can help you out with. We can do hay sampling for you. If you're having problems on what type of nutrition to give your animals, this is another thing that we can also help you out with. So winterization, where your water lines are located and how do you need to make sure that you don't get frozen pipes in the wintertime, because there's nothing worse than having to work on a leaky pipe in 10 below weather, believe me. And livestock winter feed storage, where you're going to put stuff. In case you're wondering about this picture in the lower left-hand corner, this is an example of if you leave your hose out at night and it gets frozen and you need to get water to your animals, what to do. Best thing that I was able to come up with is put it in front of the wood stove. Composition. So past uses. Is your land been used for mining? If so, are there any abandoned shafts or quarries that you need to watch out for? Are there any open wells that you need to look out for? I'd like to know where the location of in-use and abandoned water lines, sewer lines, tile lines, irrigation, and underground electric are. Are there any old dumps, cemeteries, or historic landmarks on your property that you need to worry about? Water and mineral rights. So here on the East Coast, water rights aren't as huge of an issue as they are, say, out west. So especially out west, you may own the land and you may have a river running right through it, but you might not own any water rights, and it'll limit how much, if any, water you can take away from that waterway. As I said, it's not as big of a deal here on the East Coast, but it's just something that you want to check into when you're talking to your realtor. Same thing with mineral rights. Just because you own the property doesn't necessarily mean you own the mineral rights. It's a good idea once you're making that purchase to figure out who owns those mineral rights and to kind of talk out what would happen if whoever owns those mineral rights decided to start taking minerals from your property. So right-of-ways. So what right-of-ways are is you might be looking at a piece of property and it might be what's called landlocked. What that means is that on all sides of the property is private property and there's no access from a public road. And a lot of times in the deed will be written what's called a right-of-way, meaning that you're able to put a driveway or way to your property. But sometimes those right-of-ways aren't written to any of the deeds, and the only way to get your property is a helicopter. So if you're looking at a piece of property and it's not touching a roadway, make sure you talk to your realtor, make sure you talk to your real estate lawyer and figure out how you can access that property. Also, potential future developments. If you're looking at a piece of property and it seems too good to be true, you might want to check out why. See if there's a brand new subdivision that's being put in. Find out if everywhere around your property may be going into solar panels or windmills, and see if that's something that's going to affect you. Existing structures. What are the potential hazards of the existing structures that you have? Is there out-of-date electric, out-of-date plumbing? Some of this out-of-date stuff could have lead and asbestos in it. A lot of these older farms were built back when they were still using lead paint, still using asbestos for insulation in electric and in walls. Also, some other concerns are radon and mold. So I put a good resource in. So Cornell Cooperative Extension of Yates County did a good Healthy Homes article where it breaks down the different testing and hazards of these items. So if you're buying a new used home, it's definitely something good to look. I would definitely recommend reading into these articles. Your home itself, building new versus remodeling. So building new is great, but it's also very expensive. Remodeling is going to be a lot of work, and I'll direct your attention to the right-hand side of the screen. This is what happens when you make the decision to remodel your home and are ripping out all the lath and plaster down to the bare beams and starting from scratch. The way this happened is, as I said, our house was built in the 1840s and probably remodeled in the 1960s. And while my wife was trying to vacuum the shag carpet that you could jump a rabbit out of, happened to notice that a corner of the carpet was pulled up. And when she looked underneath, there was beautiful hardwood floors. So that's when we made the decision. We're gonna rip everything out and start over. But as you can see, that's a lot of work. All right, buildings. Buildings that you have on the property. How is the roof and the foundation? Generally, as the saying goes, if you save the roof on a barn, you save the barn. What are the possible uses for the buildings that are on your property? Can you use them for what your goals are? Does it make sense to turn that building into what you want it to do? Do those buildings already meet code, or are they even insurable? And what is the cost to remove these buildings versus the cost to improve or build new? A lot of these questions can be answered once you're building a new property or looking into a new property. You'll have an inspector come out, but these are all things you can ask them and get their opinion on. Also, while you're looking at the property, you might see equipment and implements, and never assume that those are also offered in a sale. Always talk to who you're buying through, and if you are going to agree to have those implements in the sale, make sure that it is in the contract that the implements are included in the sale, because it may affect the price, your end asking price for the home. Soil and land composition. So you want to identify the different uses of what you can grow in your soil. This can be done through soil testing and also by consulting your horticulture experts. Your local extension office will have that, and I can walk you through how to do that. Is tillable versus pasture and topsoil depth. How deep is your topsoil before you hit clay or bedrock? This will help you determine what crops are suitable to grow there, what trees are suitable to grow there, what kind of fence posts you should be putting in, and how it's going to affect putting in plumbing or underground electric. You're going to want to identify restricted use lands. So wetlands are protected. So if you do have wetlands on your property, you're going to want to talk to the DEC, see if there's any restrictions on what you can do in or around that wetland. Also, if you look in the deed when you're buying your property, there might be restrictions on what you can do through the deed. It might restrict on what you can raise there. It might restrict on what trees you can take. So talk to your realtor, talk to your real estate lawyer when you're going through the purchase if there's any additional restrictions. Getting back to seasonal wetlands and drainage. So I was talking about tile lines earlier. If you don't know what a tile line is basically a corrugated pipe that's in the ground that helps move underground water so you don't have wet spots. This black pipe is the newer stuff, but if you look over here to the right, this is what the older tile lines looked like, where they were actually made out of tile and hence called a tile line. But where does that water go? Is the reason why you're having a wet spot every year is because your neighbor might have a tile line where your land has become the drainage. So just all things to keep in mind, all things to look at while you're looking at property. Your woodlot. So if you're fortunate enough to have trees on your property, what are the types of trees? What's the tree age, and how healthy are your trees? Timber uses. Are you going to be able to use those trees to tap for sap? Are you going to be able to make them for fence posts? Are you going to be able to use them for lumber? Are you going to be able to use them for logs or firewood? And if you do have those, how accessible is that timber? You know, you might have a beautiful stand of 100-year-old oaks, but if it's on the other side of a swamp, you know, how are you going to get to it, and what is the cost it's going to be to get that moved out of there? So potential value versus future value. If you plan on harvesting any trees from your woodlot, are you hurting your future value? And are there other forestry products that you can make from your woodlot, whether that be ginseng, ramps, fiddleheads, using the moss for taxidermy, growing mushrooms, selling mulch, selling biomass, or even leasing your land out to hunting or for personal use hunting. These are all additional value to having a woodlot. And if you guys have additional questions on this, again, I know I keep on harping on it, but your local extension office can help you out. You can also use Foresters will be able to evaluate your woodlot and give you a recommendation based on what you want to do with that woodlot. And here's a good link if you want to learn more about that below. Utilities. Starting off with water. So what are your water needs? What's your family size and what are your agricultural needs? How much water? This link down here is from Penn State Extension Office, and it has a really good graph on families, on determining your family size, your home size, and how much water is needed for different agricultural purposes. So if it's I would definitely research that while you're looking at property. Where's your water coming from? Is your water coming from an underground aquifer, or is your water source being drawn directly out of a lake or waterway? Definitely things you want to check out. Digging, how deep is it to get to your aquifer? If you're going to put in a new well, how deep is bedrock, which is going to be more expensive than drilling just through normal topsoil. Testing your water. What is your water hardness? Are you going to need to add a softener or a filter into your water system? You can get your water tested through private companies, and especially if you're going through a well company, they'll be able to help you test out your water. You're also going to want to keep in mind if you're for certain agricultural processing. So if you're making cheese, or if you were planning on setting up a butcher, like a 5A butcher facility, you're going to be needed testing your water regularly. And especially if you don't have the best water where you're at, is that going to be the best property to set up for what you want to do? You're going to want to find out the location of lines and shutoffs. Figure out what the plumbing type you have and the condition. Like I was saying, some of these homes are older, so you might have new piping inside the home, but outside the home, underground, it might be lead pipes. Definitely another reason why you want to get your water tested and talk to the prior owners and figure out when's the last time the plumbing was done. Maintenance. You're going to want to look into the different maintenance of what you're going to need to do to take care of your home. How often are you going to want to change the filter or change the water softener if you have those available? And here's just an example in the upper right-hand corner of how your water works. So you have your main well casing, goes down to the ground, to the water level in the underground aquifer. You have a pipe with a submersible pump. It's going to suck up the water and go into your home, where it's regulated through a pressure tank. And if this is the way your well is set up, there's a lot of different types depending on your well depth and well source. But this is one of the most common ones that we have here in the North Country. But maintaining your pressure tank, checking how much pressure you're supposed to have. So definitely look into that while you're looking at purchasing a home. Septic and sewer, where does the wastewater go? So you want to identify your septic system. Do you have one that already exists, or is it needed? Where is it located? So just real quick here, this is basically how a septic system works. You have your wastewater coming from the home, and it's going to go into your septic tank. Inside the septic tank is where it's going to leave all the hard solids, where it is stored. And higher up, there's going to be a runoff where all the gray water is going to run off underground and go into your leach field and hopefully be dispersed under the ground. Now, natural yeast within the septic tank are going to break down your solids, so you're not going to have to constantly get it pumped out. But depending on your family size and how much often, or for what you might be using it for, you're going to want to look in how often it's going to have to be cleaned out. You're going to want to have to find a local septic service that can pump on a regular basis. Generally, the recommendation that I've been getting is for regular household use is to get your septic tank pumped out every 3 years or so. Although I know I've talked to local folks that have been living with their septic tank for 40 years and have never had it cleaned out. So something you just might want to talk to the previous owner and see how often they would do that. Ease of access. So like I said, every now and then you're going to have to have this cleaned out. So you want to make sure that you're not planning on building a shed or a porch over where that septic tank is. And that's why it's really important to identify where that septic tank is. Where does the water go? So as we're saying, the gray water goes out into the leach field and preferably stays under the ground. So in order to figure out, you can do what's called a dye test. A lot of times if you're having a home inspected, they will do this for you, just making sure that the dye, which stays in the ground and doesn't bubble up as we see in this picture here. If they do see that, it's a problem, and it's probably going to mean you're going to have to redo your septic. And of course, if you guys want to learn more about how a septic system works or what you need to do to put in a septic, this is from the EPA.gov. It's a good site about how all that works. Heating. So of course, up here in the North Country is really important. Make sure you have heat. You're going to want to determine what type of fuel you're going to use, whether that be wood, propane, or fuel oil. Who's the vendor that you're going to be using to help you deliver that? If you're using propane and you have a propane tank, you're going to want to find out before you do your purchase, is that tank owned by the property owner or is it used by the fuel company, which is going to restrict on what fuel company you can use. Storage. So if you're doing wood or coal or pellets, where are you going to store that fuel so it stays dry and accessible during the time when you need heat. Venting. So what type of vent does your heat source use? So for wood, you're going to have a chimney. For other types of fuel, you're going to have different types of vents. What type of maintenance is involved? How often should it be cleaned? How far from those vents can you build certain things? All things you want to take into account. You want to make sure that you have a backup, and then a backup to that backup as far as heat sources go. As I said, in the North Country, winters can be pretty brutal, and you always want to be prepared in case the power goes out, having an additional heat source to keep you and your family warm. Preparation and finance. As the saying goes, you want to get ready for winter as soon as spring starts. So you want to start putting your wood away. You want to start saving to be able to fill that fuel tank for when winter hits. There is energy assistant through the Department of Social Services called HEAP. And if it's something that you're interested in, I provide a link through the Jefferson County HEAP program, so you can look into that. So I just want to throw this slide in there because I think it's kind of neat, the geothermal concept. So basically geothermal is drawing on the heat of the earth to regulate the heat within your home. And it is fairly expensive to put in new. But I just thought I would throw these articles in if you want to educate yourself more on what it is, how it works, and how much it might be to install. All right, electricity. Where does the homeowner's responsibility start? And how much is it to run a new line? And the benefits of running underground versus overhead. Underground, you're not going to have to worry about trees and stuff falling onto your power line if you have a lot of trees in your area. But also underground versus overhead. Overhead, you have access. If something goes wrong, you don't have to dig it up. So you're going to have to balance those, and also the costs comparison between the two. Now, I always get a lot of questions about solar and solar leasing, and it's something that you could do a whole presentation on. So I just threw in these two articles if it's something you're interested in, the different pros and cons of solar leasing and buying solar, if you'd like to look into that later. Trash removal and storage. So When living out in the country, you're responsible for taking care of your own trash. You want to figure out the location and the schedules of your local transfer site, whether that be through the township or through the county. Where can you take it? Where is location? And when can you actually pick it up? There's also going to be restrictions on certain things you can and cannot take there, separation of recyclables and stuff like that. So while you're looking at property, something to look into. There's also private companies that will drop dumpsters off at your location and pick them up on a semi-rotational basis. So it's always a possibility to look up if that is a viable option for where you're going to buy. Storage. So where are you going to keep your trash until it's trash day, and where are you going to keep it safe from pests and wildlife? Internet and phone. So internet, especially high-speed internet, isn't available everywhere, and don't assume it's available in your area. A good example is where I'm located. I'm fortunate enough to have high-speed internet, but if you go a half mile down the road on a state highway, my neighbors there don't have any internet at all. So with this link that I put in here, it's fairly accurate. Tells you what type of internet is available in the area that you're looking at and the different types of internet speeds. So that's another thing that you want to assess from your personal needs. If you're working from home, how fast does your internet need to be? How important is your internet recreation for you? What speeds you're going to need to run your favorite TV shows and streaming services? This website right here is a good way to look up and see what speeds are available. Same thing with cell service. So cell service in the North Country isn't a given. There's still places out there that don't have cell service, and especially depending on what provider you have. If you have one type of cell provider, your cell service might be great, but if you have another one, you might have nothing. So with this map from the FCC, it has a good breakdown of what different mobile providers are available in certain areas. So definitely check that out before purchasing your property. Insurance. So what is the coverage needed for your operation? How much coverage do you need for your equipment? What needs to be done to your property before your property can be insured? How much is that going to cost to do those improvements, and how soon do they need it done before they take your insurance away? These are all things you need to talk about when you're making the purchase of your home. And also double checking, not all insurance companies, just like not all banks, will cover all farm properties. Not all insurance companies will cover farm properties, and you might need to go through a specialty farm insurance company. So just when you're looking at land, just keep that in mind and making sure you find an appropriate insurance company. I'm going to talk real quick about fencing, because even if you're not planning on keeping animals, you might want to be trying to keep animals out. So you want to start out with planning. So what are you trying to keep in or out? So different animals are going to have different characteristics as well as different species or breed. So a fence that might keep in an old dairy cow might not necessarily keep in a young beef heifer. So they have different temperaments, they have different skills, I guess you would say. And they definitely all have the capability to go under, over, through different types of fencing. So do your research on what the type of animals you want to keep and the best way to keep them enclosed. We're in places that you want to avoid, kind of like we were talking about our leach fields. You probably don't want your animals grazing where your leach field is, just like you probably don't want your animals depositing waste on where your watershed is. So make sure you find out where those areas are and keep your fences away from them. Also, what's on the other side of that fence that they want so bad? Kind of keep going back to thinking about what are your neighbors doing. If you just got yourself a nice beef bull that you are planning on raising through the summer and butchering in fall, but your neighbor has a prized herd of dairy heifers that he's very diligent on keeping on a proper breeding schedule, you're going to want to make sure that you have a really solid fence so your bull isn't visiting the ladies across the street. How deep and rocky is the soil? This will help determine what type of posts you're going to put in and how well they hold the posts. How much space do you need for this type of animals that you want to raise? Also, how this can be determined on your pasture quality and soil health. Are you going to be able to access your handling facility through your fencing plan for routine care and for shipping your animals? Your animals have access to shelter, water, and feed. Do you have a plan for pasture and crop rotation? Where are you going to keep your animals in winter for ease of care and feeding? And what's your end state? And what is your plan going to be? All right. Once don't just start building fences like I kind of started doing. Have a plan and put it out so you can reach your end state without causing yourself headaches. All right, so and talk about different type of wood foot posts and fencing again, because even though might not be planning on keeping animals, it might add additional value to property that you're buying. So different type of posts, there's wood posts. These might be treated or also naturally lot resistant, such as cedar or black locusts. You hear people referring to what's called a T-post. So it's here in the upper right-hand corner. These are metal, very solid, and good for putting in barbed wire. Then there's also plastic posts. These are temporary and generally held for temporary crops and for holding electric fence. Speaking of electric fence, so there are different strengths for different type of animals. This is done through voltage, and the way an electric fence works is you have your ground rods into the ground. Your ground wire reaches up to your fence controller. Fence controller has an output that is charging the wire fencing. If an animal touches that wire, a connection is made to the soil, and they get a shock. So it is just a quick zap. It doesn't hurt the animals or people if they touch it. It's just going to hurt a little bit. These animals learn that the fence hurts, and then they learn to stay away from it. So it doesn't hurt them at all, and is a very humane way of keeping your animals in. They are solar, or these fences can be charged by solar and AC output. These fences can be composed of wire, a net, or a fabric, and they're used for different types of animals. One of the disadvantages of this fence is they can do what's called shorting out, which means they don't work anymore. They're creating a connection through vegetation, metal, or the frozen ground, meaning that when the animal touches the fence, they don't get shocked. If they don't get shocked, they realize that they can get out and can get on the other side of that fence. So wire fencing, you have your barbed wire type fencing. You also have what's called roll fencing here on the upper left. It's a little bit more expensive and labor intensive than your electric fencing. And if you're trying to keep deer out or keep deer in, if you're planning on raising deer, this is, if you can see here on the upper right hand corner, these two fences here are about 4 foot high. So this fencing here is an 8-foot fence, which is needed to keep deer in or out. Wood fencing, touch on this real quick. If you see fencing like this in the upper left-hand corner, this is what's called a snow fence. It's used to prevent snow from drifting. They're generally temporary and not really used for keeping animals in or out. Pallet fencing is very cheap and actually a very effective type of fencing, especially for keeping in hogs, but not very good for things that like to climb, such as goats. Of course, you got picket fencing, stick fencing, and your commercially made wood fencing. Also good for keeping in, for fencing in small gardens, backyards, stuff like that. PVC, plastic, and net. You see this kind of orange temporary fencing. A lot of times that's used not only for construction, but also for snow drift fencing. PVC fencing, a lot of times used for horse fencing, fairly expensive, very effective with horses, but cows have been known to break them. Then there's also net fencing. If you see this, a lot of times it's on top of a crop. It's meant to keep birds out. Other times you'll see fencing or net fencing on top where it's meant to keep game birds in if you're planning on raising game birds like pheasants or quail. Metal fencing, we don't see a whole lot of the fancy metal fencing here in the upper right-hand corner. If you get more towards the south, you'll see a lot of this nice welded fencing. It's very strong, very durable, but more on the expensive side. There's cattle panels here in the middle. These are very handy. They come in different sizes. It can be shorter, or generally can be 8 to 16 feet long. Very durable and are great for using as a gate or for a quick patch if someone breaks your fence. And of course, a metal gate. I'll touch on this real quick, but rock fencing. So rock fencing can, depending on the size and height, can be more or less effective. But the main thing to take away is if you see the property you're looking at has rock fencing, it probably means that you have very rocky soil. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so we're going to talk about our wish list. These are things that I found when I was starting my place are handy things to have, and I would definitely recommend that you look into when starting your small farm. So we'll talk about vehicles. You want to make sure that you have adequate storage capacity in that vehicle. Make sure that vehicle has adequate ground clearance for snow or poor roads. And I would highly recommend that you look into a front-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, or four-wheel drive vehicle, especially with the nasty weather we can get up here in the North Country. I also recommend that whatever vehicle you have, that it has a tow package on it, so you have that opportunity to tow a trailer when you need it. And so the vehicles you can look at, you can go and get the super fancy, probably excess of $60,000 pickup truck to haul around stuff. But what, in my personal preference, because I think it's just as good at times, is a trusty old minivan. You might have noticed in an earlier slide, I've moved calves in it. I've moved kids in it. I think I've moved pretty much about every type of livestock except for a horse in the back of a minivan. So definitely a big fan. Can also move produce if you're going to a farm stand. So something to think of. All right, talk a little bit about tractors. This is another thing that I could do a whole presentation on in and of itself, but real quick. Tractors can range to pretty much a beefy lawnmower like you see down here in the lower left, all the way up to a big fancy 4x4 diesel agriculture machine. And as you can see, they come in every size and shape and purpose in between. You're going to want, when you're looking at tractors, you're going to want to identify how much horsepower do you want. And this can be kind of intimidating, especially if you're not familiar with tractors, how they work, or understanding all the different numbers and what they mean. This website here, tractordata.com, I found is a really useful resource. And if someone says, oh, I have a John Deere 4010, what does that mean? You can go to this website, type in the make and model, and it'll show you the horsepower it has and different capabilities of that tractor. You might hear when you're looking at tractors something that's called a 3-point hitch or a power takeoff, also known as a PTO. What these are necessary for are for running your various agricultural implements, such as a mower, a baler, a plow, a bale spear, generator, log splitter, backhoe. All sorts of different implements that I cannot even list. So all sorts of different types, but all those different types of implements, depending on what they're made for, are going to require different horsepower and they're going to require different weight. So you want to do your research on whatever you want to do on what type of implements and horsepower needs are you going to be able to find for your price range. Putting a loader on a tractor, as you can see here, this tractor in the upper right hand corner with that bucket on the front, it's called a loader. It's very handy. Also in the North Country, you're going to want what's called snow chains, chains that you would put on these tractor tires to prevent slipping tires, and a tow strap in case you accidentally get your tractor stuck. So trailers, you're going to want to identify what type of needs do you have for a trailer. You know, are you going to be wanting to move livestock? Do you need to move feed and hay? Do you need to move building supplies? Do you need to move agricultural equipment or construction equipment? All these things will help you determine what type of weight rating of trailer you want, and what type of vehicle you're going to need to be able to pull it, and most importantly, stop that trailer once it has weight on it. Once you have that trailer, you're going to make sure you have a variety of straps and tie downs and chains to make sure whatever you have on the trailer doesn't come off of it. Now, in New York State, there are different rules and regulations for farm vehicles and farm trailers. Again, another presentation that or topic we could make a whole other presentation on. But if you want to learn more about it, this goes to the New York DMV website talking about the different rules for farm and agricultural vehicles. Tools. So what I did is I went ahead and I put together a list of different tools that I use, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and definitely not, if not on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. These are the tools I use the most. If you're not familiar with how to use these tools, I definitely recommend doing your research on how to use them properly, because they'll make your life a whole lot easier. With a lot of these tools, what I found is that quality definitely is worth it, worth the extra little bit of money. So when you're looking at these tools, and especially as a tool that you're going to be using every day, you want to make sure that it's of a good quality. Hardware. These are things that I recommend that you have on hand at all times. As we were talking about earlier, a lot of times in a rural area, you're far away from stores, and when you might need things, you know, the store might be open. So once your pet bull decides to break through the fence at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, you know, you're not going to be able to run to Tractor Supply to get all the things to fix it once you get them back inside. So some things you want to keep on hand: various screws and nails, bolts, nuts, and washers, different types of plumbing supplies, different outlets and breakers and wire for your electrical services. Definitely different types of fencing if you're choosing on keeping animals in. Recommend having a medical kit, not only for people, but also for your livestock and your pets. For the type of medical kit, I would always talk to your medical professional, talk to your medical professional friends, and see what they will recommend you have on hand in that medical kit. Tape, spray foam, glue, spray lubricant, starter fluid. Starter fluid is not only great for starting vehicles, but also is a great cleaner for a lot of your implements. Always make sure you have extra fuel, extra oil, things for not only your vehicles, but also for your tractor and other motor-driven implements. And lumber. You're going to want to make sure that you have a variety of different pieces of lumber on hand for just in case you need it. So additional education. So this is things that I highly recommend that you guys keep on learning, keep on bettering yourselves, and working towards what goals you have. And these are a few great resources that are out there that you can use. So there's the Cornell Small Farms Project. They offer a series of all sorts of different online courses. They're all at your own pace, and they're all through a variety of different topics, ranging from soil health all the way up down how to raise pasture pigs. So there is a lot of these courses. There is a tuition fee to it. So check out that website and see what that's all about. Jefferson County Community College. They have an agribusiness program. BOCES has also different adult education programs such as welding, electrician, These are also CDL. These are things that may come in handy for your small farm dreams. Something definitely check out your local community college. Also in New York State, there's SUNY Cobleskill. SUNY Cobleskill has a lot of great workshops and in-person learning on how to learn different skills. Some of those that I've seen are their butchering program, as well as their fiber program. So definitely check them out for some additional learning. If you're planning on getting living out in the country, I highly recommend that you take a first aid class. As we said before, response times are slower in the country and they are in a more urban setting. So it's always good to educate yourselves on how to render first aid, whether that be for yourself or a loved one. And also I would recommend if you're living in a rural setting and you're planning on using a firearm or hunting, that you definitely take a hunter safety course. Here at the bottom is through the DEC. They have a listing of different availabilities of hunter safety courses, whether that be in person or online. If you're not familiar with firearms or hunting, I highly recommend you take an in-person one when they're available. Additional resources. So as I've been saying throughout the presentation, your local extension office is a great resource. If you're planning on starting a small farm or a small farm business, they're a great resource to run different ideas off of and to provide you from additional resources. Below is for our Jefferson County Cooperative Extension. The Farm Ops program. Figure I would pitch this. So I'm the program coordinator for the Farm Ops program. Basically what I do for the Farm Ops program is we provide free services for active duty military and for veterans. We provide online and in-person courses, webinars like we just had today. And we also offer mentorships with local farmers on how to better learn about the farming type of your interests. And if you want to learn more about what we do here, I provide the link for that below. So with that, I will leave you guys with some parting advice from my experiences. First off, don't take on too much at once and stay organized. Focus on one thing at a time. Once you feel you've done that good, move on to your next thing. If you take on too many things at once, you get easily overwhelmed and it can be very discouraging. Continue your education, continue your research, and continue learning new skills. Take on things outside your comfort level and you'll be surprised on how much you're able to learn and how much you're able to do. The internet is your friend, but it's also your enemy. So there's a lot of things that I was able to learn by watching YouTube, but it's just like anything else on the internet. As there's good resources, there's also bad resources. So just make sure you're careful on where you get your information from. Get your whole family involved. That is part of the magic of farming, is to be able to have your kids, your spouses, your significant others, moms, dads, get involved into the farming project with you. Also to be able to be involved in that next generation of farming, agriculture, and the rural life. Your plans are going to change and things are going to go wrong. Don't let that discourage you. So I'll give you guys a quick story. I was working a night shift and was coming home after a 12-hour shift at about 5 o'clock in the morning when I get a phone call that my cows were out. So there I was at 5:30 in the morning in 10-degree weather, chasing cows around that had pushed through a fence that I fixed for the 5th time that month. And after I finally got them in and fixed the fence, I stormed inside saying I'm getting rid of them, was looking around for some spray paint to spray paint a sign of cows for sale. While I was doing that, I get a text message from my wife, and you can see here, this is the meme she sent me that day. And it really stuck with me to never give up on your stupid, stupid dreams. And I put the spray bottle away, went and fixed the fence better, and still going at it today. Like I said, things are going to go wrong. Things are going to be hard, but don't let that discourage you. Follow your dreams. You started it for a reason. And with that, do you guys have any questions?
John, we
John, you
actually
have a
have.
question in chat.
Yep.
Oh, let's see. So depend all across the country, most places have an extensions office. If it's not by county, it's by state. So I would look up whoever your state extension is, whether it be, so an example in Wisconsin, it's University of Wisconsin. I believe in Pennsylvania, it's Penn State. So I would start off there and work down to find out where your local extension office is. All right, does anyone else have any other questions while I'm still here? Or? Okay, if not, I just want to thank you guys very much for your time. Again, I'll be sending out these different links that I had, as well as a PowerPoint presentation if you want to go over it again. If you guys need any help with anything, please feel free to contact us here at Jefferson County Ag Team. We can point you in the right direction. And other than that, I'll be staying on for a few minutes if you guys have any other questions or comments. But thank you and have a good night.